And talking about crime, that is one of the big issues that has been related to international sports federations in recent years. And of course that's not what they should be related with. But that is a big international agenda, and in our organizations we have had Arnout, Geeraert. He is working for the University of Leuven now, but we have worked with them to look at good governance in international sports organizations. And I think it's safe to say that within the last 3-4 years, Arnout has become one of the leading experts in this topic. How should these organizations be structured and be run in a decent way? And now this issue, not because of crime, but also because of, do we actually get enough out of the money we invest in, also in national sport governing bodies? So this issue of good governance structures is also very relevant for national sports organizations and national funding models, and that's what this session is about. And Arnaud is just, you will tell yourself, I guess, working for the government in Flanders, because Belgium is a very big country with lots of parts that never speak together. Don't mention it if you talk to Arnaud. But in Flanders, the Flemish sports minister is looking at the conditions of how to fund the Flemish sports governing bodies, and Arnaud is doing that work, and he will now look at how do we get decent sports organization and decent funding models for sports organizations.
Thank you, Henrik, for that introduction. This is a lovely place. It's always a big pleasure to be here. It's always a big pleasure to talk about good governance. And I usually talk about good governance in international sports organizations, because that's what I do. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Leuven, Leuven International and European Studies. It's an institute in the political science department. And I focus on two main issues. First of all, the relationship between European Union and international sport organizations. And secondly, good governance. Good governance in international sport organizations, but recently I've started to dig into good governance in national sports organizations as well. And that's because we have been awarded a project. It's in Dutch, but it's just our application file that got the funding from the Flemish Ministry of Sport. And I'll talk to you a little bit about this project, how I tackled it, and what we can do to improve the governance of national sport organizations. Basically, the Flemish government, they asked us to develop a tool to assess good governance in national sports federations. Yeah? They wanted to have a tool that they could use that would allow them to measure good governance in national federations. Let me walk you through this short presentation. First of all, I'm going to talk about the project. What is it? What is needed from us? Secondly, I'll explain the status quo. What have we been doing? We have been working on this project. What have we been doing? What will we do? And then finally, I will give some short recommendations how I think you can proceed with good governance in national sport organizations. So let's start with the project. Okay, so there was a new Flemish decree on sport. There is a new Flemish decree coming. Decree, that's a law, a sports law. Flemish Ministry of Sport, they want to implement it from next year on, I think. And they said, okay, we have a new decree coming up. What do we want to do with our sports federations? They said, okay, we want to make them more performant, more effective, and more efficient by 2020. Yeah? And we also want a more efficient and effective allocation of our funding. There are different means by which they are trying to do this, but one of the biggest, I think, aims, one of the biggest means that they want to deploy to achieve this is to make funding partly dependent on adherence to good governance. Yeah? In order to stimulate federations and to let them take responsibility. So they say, we are going to give you some funding for good governance. If you have good governance implemented, you get all the funding. If you don't, you get a part of the funding or no funding. That's basically what it is. That's a good idea, but what do you need? You need an instrument then. You, as a government, should be able to go to the federations, to measure them, to monitor them, and to see whether good governance is actually implemented. That's, of course, where we come in. They asked us to develop an instrument to facilitate change via the development of good governance indicators. We offered them, we said, okay, we are going to make good governance indicators for you that you can use to implement, to measure national sports federations. We, that's myself, and my supervisor, Idrættens, who is a professor at our university. We have a very limited time frame. We started in January. We need to be finished by next month. That also means that I cannot give you the indicators. I'm sorry, it's still a secret. But I'm sure that the Flemish government will make them public afterwards. So I'll need to kind of talk around this a little bit and not give you the indicators. Sorry. Okay, how did we start? We had 3 problems when we started. We did not have a clear view on policy, reality, and capacity. Policy. Good governance is a big thing. Good governance can mean almost anything in a federation. What is it that the Flemish government wants to implement? We didn't know. They said, we want good governance, you need to develop indicators. And we thought, okay, well, what do you mean with good governance? It's easy when, for instance, there is a big scandal, a big corruption scandal. Then you know, imagine that there has been a big corruption scandal in the Flemish Sports Federation. Then we, as executors of the project, we know we need to focus on corruption risks. Okay? Now, there has not been a scandal. Not too many people are talking about Flemish Sports Federation, so what is it exactly that they want? Policy. Reality. Not a clear picture either. What is the status quo with regard to good governance? Nobody has a clue. There has not been any reliable studies of the governance of Flemish sports federations. Is there a problem? And if so, what are the problems? What issues do we need to address in particular? We had no idea. And thirdly, capacity. To measure and monitor good governance takes resources, takes time. How many people will be involved in this? How many people the government will employ to do this task? If we know that they have 2 people that are available for 2 weeks, we're not going to develop 40 indicators. 10 indicators or 5 indicators to review more than 60 federations is more than enough. We still really don't have a clue. So what is good governance actually? I think there are 2 angles to tackle this issue. I think it's important to think a little bit about this when you think about good governance. The issue of good governance is always approached through either a normative angle or a positive angle. Normative angle sees good governance as something good in itself, something good per se. And people that use a normative angle, they say, well, sports federations, they are directly and indirectly dependent on public means, therefore, we can expect them to adhere to good governance standards. They have to run their affairs in a decent manner. Sports federations also have been given a monopoly, kind of quasi-monopoly, on the regulation of sport, a public good. The state delegates tasks to these federations, so we can expect these federations to run their affairs decently. Okay, that's the normative angle. I think the more positive angle is more interesting and not that often used with regard to sports federations. The positive angle sees good governance as a means to an end. Implementing good governance, we know this from the literature, from studies, from practice. Implementing certain elements of good governance will impact positively on performance. Performance, growth, stakeholder confidence, efficiency, effectiveness. And I think, especially today, in this day and age, this becomes more and more important. When we look at how sports is organized, we see an increased importance of market actors, an increased importance of networks. It's not sports federations alone that are providing sports. It's networks of actors, and the network is as strong as its weakest link. So if we want to organize sports decently, we need strong sports federations. Sports federations are also losing market shares. People stop exercising sport in clubs. People start to run together with some colleagues, with some friends. They go to private companies for their sports, to fitness center, and etc. Yeah. These are issues that can be resolved with good governance. Actually, good governance is the basis. If you do not have this, you are not equipped to deal with these issues. So it is a very, very important issue. Hence, it has received increased attention in the EU. Expert group on good governance, Play the Game is a member of this group. International Olympic Committee has been trying to do something on good governance with moderate success, I think. And then at the local level, we see the emergence of good governance codes and policy initiatives. All of this feeds into our project. I didn't tell you what good governance is. I'm not going to give you a definition, because there are about 1,000 definitions. Rather than giving you a definition that you cannot remember, let me talk just 2 minutes on what I think good governance is, how we approach it in this project. If you look at a sports federation, you see that different groups, different actors are involved. And I pictured them here, the most important ones. You have the people that are actually exercising sport. They delegate authority to a general assembly. The General Assembly delegates authority to a board. Board delegates authority to advisory committees, but more importantly, management. Management delegates authority to staff. We have the general public, we, the voters, we delegate authority to the government, and the government delegates authority to a sports federation. The government says, okay, we are going to give the authority of regulating sport to sports federations. So you have all these different actors, and good governance, in my book, is making sure that these interactions between all these actors are streamlined, making sure that these actors control, stimulate and inspire each other. And you can do this by implementing the right structures. And that is the basis of good governance. That's good governance in the strict sense. Let's not make this too complicated, but as we did with the Sports Governance Observer for international federations, here we also looked at what are the key elements of good governance. It's always the same. I reviewed more than 30 codes of good governance, always the same elements that come back. Transparency, allowing others to monitor your workings. Democracy, increasing your accountability, involving stakeholders. Checks and balances, internal control procedures, a financial committee, a code of conduct, conflict of interest rules, internal control procedures, and so on. Allows for monitoring, controlling, and stimulating. And finally, solidarity, broader dimension, has increased importance in the past few years. It's about expressing responsibility towards your internal stakeholders, but also your external stakeholders, your environment. Yeah? Okay. How did we do this? We now know more or less what good governance is. How can we tackle this project? We said, well, we need a vision. We need to have an ideal picture of what it is that good governance is in a Flemish sports federation. Say that you live in an ideal world and you can create the ideal Flemish sports federation. What will it look like? Yeah? Well, it would look like the code of good governance. That's our vision. We made a code of good governance. 37 principles of good governance, more than 120 recommendations. That's a lot. Yeah? We didn't just put our finger in the air and wait for this code of good governance to emerge. We started with doing a literature review into good governance in general, indicators of good governance, measuring, implementing good governance, and we reviewed 32 codes of good governance. Yeah? 32 codes of good governance at the international level, at the local level, in Flanders, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Australia. All the codes of good governance we could find that were relevant, we reviewed. We had an expert group with experts from Flanders, from the Netherlands, from Australia, with some professors. We talked with them about the issue. We sent a questionnaire to all the Flemish sports federations. Asked them, what is good governance? What are the issues in your federation? We organized focus groups. 25 federations came to University of Leuven, and we had talks with them in small groups about our indicators. And we of course have a little bit of own expertise with the Sports Governance Observer. All that fed into the Code of Good Governance. Then the question is, 37 principles of good governance. Can we expect sports federations to implement this? Can we expect the Flemish Ministry of Sport to monitor this? More than 120 recommendations. No, it's too much. We need to make choices. And what we did was, we said we are going to develop 2 sets of indicators. Come back at this point in the next slide. Hard indicators, soft indicators, and this is very important, we stress, and we keep stressing it, and we hope that they will pick it up. If you want to implement good governance, you need a policy that facilitates, that supports the federations, that gives templates, best practices, one-on-one advice, and so on. Yeah? You need to implement the policy, otherwise it will never work. So, again, Code of Good Governance is the whole pyramid. The indicators of good governance we used is a small part of this pyramid. Yeah? So we had to make a choice. To picture this a little differently, the Good Governance Code you see on the left, that's our roadmap. That's where we want to go to. That's our vision. And we're going to do this by the means of hard and soft indicators. And to finish, let me explain to you how this works. What do I mean with hard indicators? We said, okay, all the federations, all the Flemish sports federations need to adhere to certain minimum standards of good governance. We define minimum standards that should apply to all federations, on the basis of the Code of Good Governance, of course. What we did was, we said we're going to operationalize these by means of binary indicators, meaning yes or no. Very simple. You have these indicators, 28 indicators, you have it or you don't have it in place. Yeah? Binary, yes or no. People sometimes use scaled indicators. With those of you who are familiar with the Sports Governance Observer will know that we use scaled indicators there. Meaning that you have a certain element of good governance, and you as a federation, you can achieve a score of 0 to 4, for instance. Yeah? If you have nothing implemented, you get a 0. If you have state-of-the-art implementation, you get a 4. If you have a little bit implemented, you get a 1, and so on. Yeah? This system does not work when you link your measurement with financing, with funding. For all different reasons. I'm not going into these. There are methodological obstacles. They leave room for interpretation. They also necessitate comprehensive testing. When I did this with the Sports Governance Observer, these scaled indicators, I need to review about 20 federations before this was working, these scaled indicators. So we said we need hard indicators. And just to give you a little picture of how this might look like, okay. Yeah. I had to delete the text because I cannot give it to you, but let's say that we have 4 dimensions of good governance: transparency, democracy, checks and balances, and solidarity. For each dimension we have a certain number of indicators. For this dimension I think we have roughly 10 indicators. You have the text of the indicators and you have very, very clear criteria. Yes or no. Yeah? Okay, then we said that's all good. Very useful, very practical, but yes and no indicators, that doesn't really give a nuanced picture of reality. So we said, okay, we are also going to develop scaled indicators. Yeah? Scaled indicators, score of 0 to 4, operationalized also on the basis of the Code of Good Governance, but we said, due to methodological obstacles, do not make this dependent upon funding. Do not link this with financing. No financial implications, because it's too difficult. And what we did was we operationalized this on the basis of the steps that a sports federation should take to implement the element of good governance. So, let's say the organization involves internal stakeholders in its decision making. If you don't involve stakeholders in any way, you get a 0. That's step and score 0. The first step you can take is by starting to communicate your decisions to your stakeholders. And then in the step number 4, the state-of-the-art dimension, the optimized dimension, you have a strategy that involves social media, you send out questionnaires, you allow for, I don't know, competitions for good ideas that can emerge from your stakeholders and so on. So the steps that you really use, so a federation knows, I can start with this, then go to this, then go to this, and end up here. This has the benefit that you give information. You have kind of a barometer of good governance. The Ministry of Sport can see here federations are not doing a good job. Maybe they need to improve here. Maybe we can start some policy initiatives. But it also creates awareness of the importance of a broader implementation. Good governance is about more than just these basic minimum yes or no criteria. It's a big story. And it's not because you have implemented these minimum criteria that the story is over. To conclude, so some recommendations. Monitoring, I think, can help. Yeah? It supports decision making and it increases the accountability of federations. One very important thing, I know that these tools exist, but let me stress that self-evaluation never provides an objective picture of the status quo. Yeah? You cannot simply give a questionnaire to federations and say, okay, you fill it in and then we get it back and then we see how you are doing. No, you need somebody objective, an objective outsider with expertise to score federations. We also have a need for strictly defined pre-established criteria, tailored to the specific context. So imagine that you in Denmark would want to implement something like this. You will need to think, what do we need in the Danish context? And let's make this applicable to Danish federations. So general criteria of good governance that you often see, they do not work. You have different methodological options, scaled indicators or yes or no indicators, both with their benefits. And you need supporting policy. There's definitely a role for governments and sports confederations. If you would like to implement this here in Denmark, the government would have to start with a policy. The confederation would have to start with sharing best practices, giving out templates, giving one-on-one advice, and so on. And finally, very importantly, good governance, implementing good governance, takes time and resources. Yeah? It doesn't happen overnight. And you have to make choices. We have a code of good governance, 37 principles, 120 recommendations. We cannot implement this whole code starting tomorrow. We need to make choices. We need to start somewhere. Start somewhere, make a basis of good governance and start there. Thank you very much.
Just one question. I know, and this is an unscientific question, and I know that will maybe give you some difficulties, so it is a non-binding reply I ask you to give. If you look now at the Flemish Sports Federation, as you know them, I know you didn't review them, and the indicators and the standards you are coming up with, how far would you say in general they would be from state of the art? Where would they be on that scale in general?
It's difficult because I think the only reliable, more or less reliable information we got on their functioning came out of the focus groups we did, where they talked about, okay, we do not have this in place, we do not have that in place. I think most federations do not have. If I just look at, the basic, the yes or no indicators that we defined, I think most federations do not have 80% implemented. So it's, situation is serious in that regard. That doesn't mean that they are running their affairs in a bad manner, but they did not have implemented these structures. And it would take them, I think, 4 years, up to 4 years, to implement these basic requirements of good governance, and to implement, not state-of-the-art, because that's not achievable for everybody, but like a score of 3, that would take 10 to 12 years, I think.
Okay, so it's a long journey.
It's a long journey, absolutely.
State-of-the-art. Yeah. So now we will move to London Sport, which is responsible for delivering sport and physical activity in the capital. of London, and they are maybe in some ways a bit further down the road because they have changed the way they fund sport to achieve the targets, and it's better that you talk about that, David.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Probably just as well you've got your conference this month, and it was very nice of Henrik to invite me today. As you know, there's an EU referendum in my country, and in a month's time I might not have been allowed in Denmark, so so it's a great pleasure to be here today. Like I said, London Sport have been formed just over a year. We've got a groundbreaking strategy where we're kind of trying to break down all the things that were assumed and all the things that were taken for granted for the last 10, 20 years, and really looking at focusing our investment on areas that we really know will make a big difference. So, okay, we don't deliver anything at all, so we rely on other organisations. So we want to be the first stop shop for physical activity in London. My presentation today is going to go through some of the challenges. Some of the challenges are also opportunities for us. We need to get across what we're trying to achieve, what the measures and the outcomes we're trying to achieve are, and then how are we going to do it? What are we going to do to make that difference? What does the future hold? Will be the last little thing. We have a new government strategy in place in the UK, and last week Sport England launched their strategy. So we have to make sure that we fit in with those bigger kind of national documents. So before I start, here's a short video just to sum up what we're trying to achieve.
London, our great city, one of the most diverse and unique cities in the world. A fast-moving, modern and connected city, a first-class transport network and a vibrant centre of commerce. London has more green space than any other city in the world. It's a premier location for world-class sports events and so much more. However, 1 in every 2 people are not physically active, increasing to 3 in every 4 with a disability. There are half the number of leisure facilities per person than the rest of the country, and it will get worse. London's population is increasing, and by 2020 it will exceed 9 million. London is a city of extremes, with the most well-off living next to those most in need. But we have a vision for change. For our great city to be the most physically active sporting city in the world. We want a revolution in participation, helping 1 million people to be more active in their day-to-day lives, helping inactive people to do something, and those doing something to do more. And we can all play our part. By helping sport and physical activity to work better, by sharing resources, offering local knowledge, by working together efficiently and effectively. London Sport is the network that fits it all together. Along with you, we will make it easier for Londoners to find the right activity for them, to stay active and reach their potential. We'll simplify the system. We'll work hard to get more resources. We will develop a bigger and better workforce, and we will harness the power of elite sport to inspire the future generation of talent, so that by 2020, 1 million people are more active. That means 1 million more people healthier, happier and stronger. Help every Londoner to be 1 in a million.
There you'll see very ambitious targets that we've set ourselves. So before we go on, just wanted to give you an overview of some of the challenges in London. We have varying participation rates. So in the southwest of London, there are a lot of people in a place called Richmond that are taking taking part in sport regularly. So over 53% of residents over the age of 16 are participating once a week, and that's a general measure that we use. In East London, near the Olympic Park in Leuven, that drops as low as 22% of adults taking part in sport once a week. You will see that luckily, you could say, or as a result of some of the interventions that we are implementing, participation isn't falling off as much as the rest of the country. You'll see 38.5% was our peak just after the Olympics, and as normal, there is a steady decline following big events like that. Hopefully we're going to buck that trend and you'll see that line dividing further in the coming years. So London is a very diverse city. You'll see in the top left-hand corner, we have a population still of nearly 60% white, and then the rest, 40%, are ethnic minority groups. Those with a limiting disability, 85%, do not have a limiting disability, 15% have some kind of disability, so we need to take that into account. You see the bottom left, physical activity rate. So currently, 57.8% of people are currently active. However, there are issues. So you'll see there is a big gap between male and female participation. Now, the bottom right is an interesting one. So the way that things are measured in the UK is via a survey called Active People Survey. One of the questions it asks is, do you want to do more sport and physical activity? So that gives you a figure about latent demand, and that can be used by organisations to justify investment in certain areas and certain facilities. So what do we want to achieve? You'll see that document on the left is really our grand vision for London. What are we trying to achieve? The strategy on the right is really London Sport's contribution for achieving those targets. We have a vision to make London the most active sporting city in the world. But we're more than just sport. Sport puts off a lot of people. The word sport, people just look blankly at you and thinking it's something they can't achieve or can't aspire to. We want London to be the very best in the world, not just people just doing any old sport. We want it to be high quality provision that's likely to keep people involved for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And as you saw in the video, we have a target of getting 1 million more people active by 2020. Now, I'm not going to stand here today and say that everything we do is perfect, because clearly, you will see that third line down is a figure for Denmark, quite interestingly. And I know you've had issues with your participation going down. We're currently 9th in the world. If you compare against, if London was a country, we'd be 9th in the world. So one thing I'll talk about a little bit later is some of the work we're doing to create benchmarks that are comparable throughout the world, because I know it's an issue when you say we have a target of one thing and you can't be directly compared to another country or another city. So when we came into place about a year ago, London had a very fragmented market where schools wouldn't speak to leisure providers wouldn't speak to sports clubs, and pretty much everything was being done in isolation. We think our role is to coordinate all of those people so we know what's going on, we know the best. There is funding for a particular initiative, we know the likely organisations, the likely venues, the likely people to be able to achieve the targets we want to achieve. So, who makes up the 1 million people? As you saw in the video, there is going to be a clear population growth issue, which is going to create some challenges in itself, but 1/3 of our 1 million target is going to be from natural population growth. 1/3 is going to be getting inactive people active. Now, you saw there in London, around 50% of people are inactive. And the other third is going to come from people already doing activity, doing a little bit more. I think sometimes people take their eye off the ball in the sense that you and me like activity. However, when I had my second child, I probably took 2 or 3 years out just because everything was so busy, kind of the priorities in my life changed. So we just got to make sure that we don't just focus on specific groups and take away the opportunities and the life transitions that people like you and me have, where you might dip out of sport and then it might be really difficult to get back engaged. So how we measure the activities is via, like I said, the Active People Survey. And what we class activity or inactivity is people doing less than one 30-minute session per week. Now, insufficiently active are people doing between 31 minutes and 149 minutes a week. And then active are doing more than 150 minutes of activity. So this isn't just sport, this is anything from gardening to walking to cycling to swimming. So the whole spectrum of activity. The measures, as part of the new Sport England strategy, is actually changing in the next year. So it's going to be very much, before the Active People Survey would ring people up, they would ask them a series of questions. Governing bodies would say, well, of course our people aren't going to answer because they're out training, they're out doing sport, so they're not going to be at home picking up the phone. So a lot of national governing bodies actually challenged that survey methodology as not being particularly effective. So the active lives data will be around people choosing various methods, either through an app or through a website, different ways of gathering that data. And then one thing our insight team are looking to do as well is to look at getting some objective data, capturing stuff that we're working on, and I'll talk again a little bit about that at the end. So you'll see currently 8.7 million people live in London. And that's going to grow to 9.1 million by 2020. You'll see population in terms of ethnicity. By 2040, London will have a majority ethnic population. So again, some of the things that we assume, the traditional methods that will engage people in the past 20, 30, 40 years, might not engage some of those ethnic groups. Yeah, but that's black and minority ethnic groups. So that's the ethnicity. Everyone that's not white comes under a BAME group. You'll also see another challenge that we have is going to be the ageing population. Over that same period, next 20 years, proportionately children will be reducing. 17 to 50-year-olds will be reducing. And then the 50-plus population will be the massive growth area. In addition, if you're a female in London, you're 30% more likely to be inactive. So again, that's another challenge that we need to try and overcome, and I'll talk a little bit later about the project that we're doing to address that. The other big challenge we have, linked to that age demographic, is as you get older, in the UK, in London, your activity levels go down. Now, I was interested to hear last night from Henrik that your demographic, as you get older, once you get past 60, it seems that people get more active, but certainly not the case in London. So what we've done, and we have a dedicated resource and an insight team, is to look at some of the behaviours of those individual groups, and we come up with interventions that will be attractive to those particular groups and segments. So you'll see the 4 priority groups: older people, disability, black and ethnic minority, and female. What we can't do, though, is to take our eye off the ball, and those people who are already active that do not fit in those groups do not have an opportunity to take part. Okay, so in the last year, what we've done, we have a series of grant funding programs that we offer opportunities to traditional and non-traditional groups to do sport. We have a funding and facilities advisory staff who will give information to any group about how best a project is developed. You'll see from that video that facilities in London are very hard to come by just because of the lack of space. So quite often we're having to be innovative and encouraging people like schools to open up their facilities, looking at parks and open spaces as a real kind of opportunity to grow participation, and looking away from the non-traditional kind of club environments that have been driving sport for the last few years. Now, another area of growth that we've had is our insight team. So you ask, what is insight? Insight essentially is using information that's there publicly available quite often, although they do some primary research. And then quite often, funders will say, what's the need for your project? Now, to give you an example, if there's a bowls club and they want to apply for a pavilion, but their demographic within a kind of 5-mile radius of where they want the facility is mostly young people, then clearly that's not going to be a very strong investment proposition for the likes of Sport England, because the majority of people that do bowls are going to be over 50, over 60, over 70. So our insight team will quite often produce reports that will either back up or contradict where an organisation or a series of organisations want to invest or want to put in a funding application, for example. Now, as I said, we don't deliver anything at all. So it's really, really important that we develop relationships with all of those segments that we saw earlier. So part of my role is looking after our local authorities. So we have 33 in London. I manage 8 of those relationships across South London. Now, local authorities are going through the biggest challenges that they've had in 40 years in terms of reduced funding. So the role that we can play in that is kind of stepping in and having that local knowledge where we know that there's an opportunity because a club in one part of South London has great facilities, but they've got a low membership base. You might have somewhere else that has a rundown facility who they're struggling to pay the capital overheads. And actually by getting those clubs and those organisations to speak to each other can actually result in some kind of mutual benefit. So relationship building is still key. So a lot of what we do is linked to programs. So these are kind of 4 programs that I'll just quickly talk through some examples of what we've been doing. So Sportivate is a 6 to 8 week intervention that will fund the club or an organisation to try something new, something different. So it might be a traditional football club that want to do something for girls and women. It might be a youth club who have never done sport before, but they want to play table tennis or do something to get their young people active. Prior to this year, we had an open funding round where it pretty much gave everyone the chance to apply. And funnily enough, the results came out that those priority groups, girls and women, were less represented. Older people were less represented. So what we decided to do to say, we said, let's have a girls and women specific focus. We'll look at some of the insight around the behaviours of those girls and women who traditionally drop out about the age of 14. And we will encourage and give information to those organisations to put them in a better position to attract those young people. So, for example, quite a lot of the literature and publicity actually took sport out of it. It was about, do you want to make friends? Do you want to have fun? And again, that's a bit contentious, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, about the word fun in sport, because quite often, sport isn't fun. Sport England have done a bit of research recently that I encourage you to read. It's about youth insight and the behaviours of young people and why they want to do activity. And where you and me might engage in sport because it is fun, to a lot of people, older people, girls and women, sport isn't fun, but they know it's good for them. They have issues around their appearance. So we've got to think about messages that will get people doing activity, but actually the word sport isn't really used. You'll see that they had some really good kind of results from that program by focusing on those specific groups. Another one that's worked really well, and this is about taking traditional club environments into education settings. So there are, again, transitions for young people when they reach secondary school and then they go to university. It's quite a big jump from going in a kind of comfortable environment where you're in school, you're doing sport in school, and then having to go on your own to a local club or cross that boundary where you think, actually, at school you kind of had to do it, your teachers made you do it, but it's quite a big jump going into a club environment for a lot of people. So the kind of ethos around satellite clubs is we will fund organisations, traditional clubs, to go into school sites. They will do 30 weeks of delivery on the school site, and then we encourage them to think about that transition those young people are going to have from the school and education settings back to the kind of traditional clubs. Last year, you'll see we invested $600,000 in 400 community sport clubs. And what clubs are looking to do, let's not just say, if you're a football club, just go in and deliver a football session. That isn't going to be very engaging. What we want them to do is to develop an unmissable experience for those young people, where sport will still be the heart of the offer, but it'll be much more than just the sport offer. It'll be around the kind of learning, the social cohesion, all of those kind of bigger picture stuff that kind of gets forgotten at times. And as I mentioned, the Youth Insight stuff is well worth a read as well. A little bit around coaching. Coaching is still going to be critical in getting people doing more sport and physical activity. What we've looked to do this year is to go away from funding technical qualifications, because funding level 2 coaches, funding level 3 coaches doesn't really tell you how you're going to engage with a group of people who are not really wanting to do that sport. They're not really wanting the technical skills about how you dribble around 20 cones and how you come back. What it's looking to do is to teach people about the behaviours of young people, what their challenges are, some of the kind of things that make that to kind of bigger issues around people. So what their home life is like, whether they're getting bullied at school. All of those kind of things are where we're starting to invest in coaches rather than just the technical skills. Now, something quite innovative that we're doing, and it's called place-based activity, is thinking about the challenges that we have about an ageing population. Those old people quite often are very inactive. If they're in a care home setting, they can't come to a club to do activities. So we have needed to change our offer, and this netball project that we did actually went into some care homes. It trained some activators who were kind of care assistants in those homes. They provided some equipment, very low cost equipment, maybe £30 or £40 sport to the people that need it most, rather than just creating leisure centres, creating school environments and expecting people to always come. One thing we're looking to do, going back to what I mentioned at the beginning around benchmarking. So we have set up an Active Citizens Worldwide project. So it's almost my plea to you, if you know people in the major cities around the world who want to work with London Sport to create some benchmarks around physical activity, some benchmarks around how to become more active, then come and speak to me. Henrik has been invited to a session that we're doing later on this year in London, where we're going to explore it a little bit more. But what we're really looking to do now is to look at some major cities around the world that will want to partner with us to do some of that benchmarking. So you'll see some of it is around understanding the demographics, looking at your enablers, those organisations that encourage people to do sport, and then looking at kind of creating some outcomes from that. So, just to wrap up, what does the future hold for London Sport and for us? We have a government strategy that's just been launched that really is looking at more than just how sport can increase participation. So, the broader objectives: how does sport contribute to economic development? How does sport contribute to social development? How does sport contribute to mental well-being? So one of the things that we need to try and do, and sport as an industry has been very bad at it for the last 20 or 30 years, is really looking at almost the so what. We know sport is a good thing, but how can we demonstrate that with some real evidence to become attractive for people like public health? Finally, actually I know Svend's going to touch on this, finally public health actually realised that the amount of money that's spent when people get sick when they're in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and then they could be sick in care homes costing millions of pounds for 30 years, they're starting to think about, let's invest in people when they're in their 20s and 30s, to start getting them to take more responsibility for their own health and well-being. And just a little quick story about my mum. When she turned 70, 5 years ago, she struggled to get up the stairs. She was just under 90 kilos. She was thinking, wow, this is really tough. I could live to 80 and I can't even walk around playing with my grandchildren. So I used to be a personal trainer. So I said, right, Mum, I'm going to train you. If you tell my mum that sport is fun, she will look at me and think, no, sport is not fun. But she understood that she needed to take some action about her own well-being. So pretty much, and to my wife's consternation, every Sunday for the last 5 years, I've been going and I've been training her. So she does everything from box jumps to skips to punching on a punch bag. Now in that 5 years, she's lost 20 kilos. She can walk up the stairs. She can do loads more than she did 5 years ago. But if you told her, go and do sport because it's fun, She will still tell you she's not had one fun session in 5 years. But functionally, she's much better off. So we need to start making people take more responsibility for their health and well-being. Just quickly, and I know there's some people outside, technology is going to play a massive part in growing sports participation. We had a conference a couple of months ago called The Revolution Will Be Digital, and we realised that we need to embrace the digital world. And I know there's some people out there on the stands who are looking at developing apps that will help people become motivated to do more activity. They will develop apps where people don't have the fear of doing something and they're doing it wrong, because that is a massive barrier for people. They go in a gym, they see all these people look like they know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, they're too frightened to ask an instructor, they'll turn around and they'll go out. If you have an app that will show you great technique on a piece of equipment, then that's more likely to engage people in their kind of behaviours. So that's really, for me, to sum up. These are my details. I'm hanging around pretty much for the rest of the day. If anyone wants to come and speak about anything I've spoken about, potentially whether you want to partner up or you know someone who wants to partner with this Active Citizens project that we're doing, just come and have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have now looked to Great Britain United Kingdom is just as confusing as Belgium, as you know. They have Sport England, Sport Wales, Sport Scotland, Sport Northern Ireland responsible for the home countries, and then they have UK Sport responsible for elite sport in the whole of United Kingdom, and then they have the local agencies. And then they have, of course, Svend Elkjær, who is a Dane who's stranded in England, and he is now walking around collecting stories about innovative things going on in sport, and he's working a lot with Sport Wales and Sport Scotland because they want to change, and they have done a lot of exciting things and are in the process of doing it. And we were initially we had Gordon Clark from Sport Wales. He had to apologize, so I said, Svend, you know the story anyway, so could you give us a brief overview of these changes going on in Scotland and Wales? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Henrik. It's interesting, isn't it, that yesterday, and still we're talking about the club, the forening in Denmark being the key. We see more and more parts of the world where that is no longer the case. And I think it's very interesting to see how London sport is doing things differently than you are doing somewhere else. Do I think you could do things the same way in Copenhagen and in the middle of nowhere in Jutland? No, I don't think you can. Do I think we have to adapt what we do to where we are? Yes, I do. So, about 10 minutes about what is happening. That's me. Some of you guys know me, and I've been in England for now 30 years. I've got a publishing background. I was a volunteer at Rugby Club, turned the club around with some help, and I've now been the last 9 years running the Sports Market Network, where I work with local governing bodies all over the place. And it's all about innovation, enterprise, and doing things differently in a different world, in a changing world. And I'm now telling you a story about what is happening in Scotland and Wales. But before that, I'll just give you a brief overview of what is happening in over there. But you've got Sport Scotland, Sport England, Sport Wales, and Sport Northern Ireland, and they are completely and utter different. So, I'll leave Sport Northern Ireland to its own because when I go and work there, you've got the Catholics and the Protestants, and these are grown men supposedly, and they don't talk to each other. So leave that one out. But remember, Scotland's got the same population as Denmark, 5.3 million, and Wales got 3.1 million. Of course, Scotland is massive in terms of size. So you've got Glasgow and Edinburgh being the size of Copenhagen, more or less, and you've got areas where you don't see anybody for about days when I go there. So, a breakdown. As David said, local authorities are facing some amazing costs. Some are coping with it well, some are not. Give an example. Birmingham, population 1.6 million, used to have 24,000 employees. They got 12,000 now. That's half. You're trying to find a sports development officer and local authority now. You're going to struggle. Some years ago, the new government came in and said, we're going to try and divest some of the local authority buildings, etc., into the society, into the community. It's called asset transfer. It hasn't really happened. Some local authorities thought they were clever. We will keep all the good facilities to ourselves, and you can, the society, community can have all the bad ones. I keep the Ferrari, you can have the 30-year-old car. And that didn't work either. So that hasn't really worked. It's not very good in practice. There was a big thing called big society, where we're all going to be involved, all engaged. And I've been out there being consultants on projects, and it's been a failure. Call it what you like, it's been a failure. So they've been trying to do that, and you haven't heard the word big society for a long time, because it simply wasn't working. We are now seeing the whole world of social enterprise in sport really growing. It's basically a socialøkonomisk virksomhed in Danish. They are often run by people who are quite mad because they do things out in the community without permission. So I organize a conference every year about disability sport. And 9 times out of 10 the case studies are from people whose kids or relatives are disabled and then deal with the issue. So there's some fantastic stuff taking place out there, and certainly in Scotland, where they really have been able to encourage that. The funny thing is in Scotland, which I'll come back to, where you've got a government which is very centralistic, there's nothing better than supporting social enterprises out in the communities, which is quite interesting. So we begin to see more of that. I had the Copenhagen City Council's Culture and Leisure Committee over in Manchester a few weeks ago, and I showed them some social enterprises. Like Manchester Climbing Centre, which is now it's in a former church. Run as a social enterprise, but they charge the things, they make money, but the money goes back into the enterprise. Quite clever. So that is happening. We are seeing more and more informal providers. People just do things. In late July, I'll be going to Scotland for 4 days again, because I've now got a new client called the Scottish Forestry Commission. Why do I go and work in the woods in Scotland? No, this lady who runs a bicycle club in the woodlands said, I want to set up something more sustainable. How do I do that? The woodlands people in Scotland said, that's a really good project. Here's some support, here's some money. So she gave me a call. Can we set up now a project called Cycling in the Woods in Scotland? Perhaps. Is Scottish cycling involved, the governing body? No. Should there be? Yes. We are seeing the whole issue about what is called sport for social good, or in Scotland called sport for change. In Denmark I'll call it Idrættens, where sport more and more now are being asked to go out there and certainly engage with the least active people. And often we now see the more innovative sports provision happening by housing associations, football clubs, community programs, all the rest. So the governing bodies are now beginning to struggle big time because they still do sport. There were some people who said, begrudgingly, maybe Sport England and Sport Scotland could be called Active England and Active Scotland. We are more and more being now asked to be able to prove the value of our work. So whether you're in Scotland, England or Wales, wherever you are, if you say, oh, we've got kids doing sport, it's a good thing. And the answer is, prove it. So can you now say that 48 kilos have been lost, or more attainment in school, all the rest of it, with hard facts? That is creating some massive problems. And the new strategy in England is also now talking about soft issues, improving people's lives. How do you quantify improving people's lives? And you've got some very clever academics right now trying to sort this one out. I can't wait to see the answer, but there we are. We are now also seeing a certain change from the centralized approach to a more partnership working. More and more bodies are now saying, we don't know, sitting up here in ivory towers, what is happening down here, how do we engage with those weird and wacky people up there? And finally, we are now seeing that sport is moving out from culture and have now moving in more and more with health and community. That is also now giving a massive challenge for the people who work in sport, because they now have to go and speak health. And health people do one thing, they do stats, evidence, etc. So if you don't know your BMI index improvement, the health people say go away. So that is going to be a big, big change. So that's some of the backgrounds. But interestingly, in Scotland and Wales, both the people in the government who are in charge of sport have got the same job title. Minister for Sport, Health and Wellbeing. So, in England, it is still the Culture, Media and Sports Secretary. So those people there are in charge of improving people's lives, to use that broad space. And sport sits there. I know that's different for Denmark, but you can see where that angle is now coming from. And some people say, who's got most money, health or sport? Health. So, Sport Wales have changed their strategy completely. I worked with Sport Wales now for 6 years. It's been great fun. I was involved in really making enterprise to the core of what they do there. So they're going from a top-heavy, the money is the same. They've still got the same amount of money from the government, but they're now basically saying, we will have 4 regional offices, agencies, who are going to deliver sport with partners of themselves. Second aspect is, whoever can deliver best sport will get the contract. So, does that mean that the governing bodies may not always be delivering? Yes. If you can deliver more sport for the same money that you can, you will get the contract. Because their job is to get people active. Does that mean that the governing bodies say we now have to do a massive change? Yes. I'm starting work there in July. Do you want to think about succeed with all the governing bodies? No. Football and rugby, the big sports in Wales, they'll survive anyway. They'll just do what they're doing because they've got plenty of money. But if you're now Welsh rowing or Welsh handball or God knows what, you now have to say, hang on, how do we do this? Because if you don't do it, you won't get any money. Come back to the funding criteria now for DIF. How do we now deliver? That's a completely different level of accountability than just, here's some money, you go out and do it. So it's a much more enterprising approach, which also then require the people who work within sport to either to change or to be changed. That sounds harsh. If you can't deliver, you're going to need no money. So Sport Wales have really taken that approach in a very open approach. And so, of course, some people are worried because change hurts. And if I've been doing the same thing for 9 years, got the funding every year, and now I have to do something differently, that's going to be a cultural and skill set change. But also in Wales, they now have for the last 9 months had a partnership between Sport Wales and Public Health Wales. And it's beginning to work. It's been a long, long process because lack of trust, lack of understanding, all the rest. But we see now more and more projects over there where they have now worked with, and again, often has been the informal providers, the social enterprises who've been understanding this, where some of the governing bodies, the official and certainly some of the local authorities, simply haven't understood this. But we are now seeing more and more cases of this, and you started getting some momentum going on that one. Up in Scotland, completely different. They have got 400 school sport coordinators. 400. They have got 153 community sport hubs out there. It's all about process and structure and strategy. I work with lots of these people, so I have to be careful what I say, but where they work is down to one thing and one thing only: people. You cannot have a strategy for people getting on with each other. But if you could, why this place like this? Because of Jakob Sander. Give me 10 of him, and the world will change. Sometimes strategies and all those things are fine, but if you haven't got the right people in place, it won't work. At the same time in Scotland, you've got about 150 social enterprises in sport who are almost working in parallel with the system, or were working in parallel with the system. So we now have beginning to see a segment in Scotland for sport for sport's sake, just doing sport, and a sector doing sport for change, people doing good stuff. That doesn't work, does it? Because it's two worlds. So, what happened? Enter Mel Young. Mel Young is a social entrepreneur. Mel Young launched the big issue magazine for homeless people. It's called Who Should Be in Denmark. He also launched some years ago the Homeless World Cup in football. It takes place in Glasgow in July this year. There are going to be 700 people playing across the world, 52 nations. The Danish team is coming from Arnout. So he's a social entrepreneur who's keen on how we get sport to deliver these things. And on June the 1st, he becomes the chair of Sport Scotland. So that is now sending a signal to the sport for sports sake people, you need to change. I'm doing a conference in 4 weeks' time in Edinburgh where he's presenting all about this. So you're now beginning to see street sport people talk to the Scottish government. And that signal there is very, very powerful, I think, how those things are changing. Some examples from Scotland. In Aberdeen, the big place, they're currently advertising for an activity manager working in partnership with cancer research, Cancer Bekæmpelse, and the council to get people who suffer from cancer on chemotherapy more active. In Edinburgh, they have moved sport into be part of communities and facilities. It's no longer sitting over there, the culture, let's move over there. So these things are happening gradually, and so on and so forth. Finally, it's all great and good with these strategies, and there are two different solutions. And I think it's wonderful to have strategies, it's wonderful to have plans, all the rest. But if we don't change the culture, and one thing they are doing now, certainly in Wales, they're gradually changing the culture of how we do these things. And finally, I'm involved in a project with the Mayor of London about getting women more active. And at the launch meeting 2 months ago, I've never heard so many times say to people that say, go out and make a mistake, go out and learn, come back and tell them how you made a mistake. And I thought, I can't believe I'm sitting in sport in the UK. We're beginning to now see a change, because if you're going to reach these hard-to-reach people, it can't be done by using the same tools. And that we're seeing all the place now. And these are the two different models, same challenges, but two different models completely. I'm not saying which one is right or wrong or whatever, but that is, I think, it's a fascinating thing from countries who are comparable with Denmark. Thank you.
Yesterday, if you were at that session, you could hear the beloved leader of Danish, the National Olympic Committee and Sports Confederation of Denmark, talk about the very, very big structural reform they have been through now in the funding of the 61 national governing bodies that is under that umbrella. And we asked Morten to come in here and do it in 5 minutes in English, the presentation he gave yesterday. No, we didn't. We actually asked him to comment on these presentations from 4, 5, 6, 7 regions, countries in UK and Belgium. Because the difference is when you said that whoever can deliver gets the contract. In Denmark, we have given the contract to the sports organizations that are owned by the members. And they are now working very hard to being able to deliver. And that is the difference. So Morten, you will have what can you use from this, what is different, and then afterwards we have you up in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. I'm the one without slides and no speaking time and problems with the sound. I'll give a short comment on the issues in DIF and trying to compare them what we have heard here. And I would say, first of all, about good governance. In Denmark, we have all our member federations in the DIF are obliged to adopt some good governance rules. I would say it in the, what I call in the narrow sense, about checks and balances, about financial things, behave probably not making corruption scandals and so on. And it took some time, but they have all now adopted these governance rules. But what perhaps is more interesting is good governance in the broad sense, meaning can we also make this work being efficient, effective organization, making results in some of the areas Svend and David talked about. And in that manner we have worked in the DIF the last year, or actually the last years, in reforming our economic structure, because although culture is very important, economy is also important, and I think economy can move some cultural barriers. So we have just been through a actually very good and positive process with all our member federations, where they have taken ownership for a new economic structure. That means actually that they give their stable, secure economic situation away for a new future. That means that they are now depending on making, with most of the money, strategic contracts with the DIF in order to be able to cope with some of the challenges we face in the sports organizations. And that is, of course, some of the things both Svend and David told about, challenging sports organizations also in Denmark, about being able to handle new targeted groups. To be honest, the DNA in DIF and our member federations has always been, and will be in the future also, children and youth. But we can also see, if we want to be part in this in a broader sense, and also have activities for the adult population, we have to make new ways of approaching adult people who just want to exercise, don't do any tournaments, and do it, some of them, for health. And that means that we have to see which of our sports are good at these things, which suits to the habits of the population, and can they and will they, the federations and their clubs, make new, special, and perhaps more easier offers to the population. And we have been working for this for the last 4 or 5 years, but with this new economic structure we will be even more focused on doing these big things, because we can now make individually long-term strategic contracts with our member federations in order to try to handle some of these issues. And we do it also together with our sister organization, DGI, where we have this common vision on making more active people in Denmark. We have not been as clever as in London, where you took an absolute number, and when the population growth, you just need not to... We took a percentage of the population, and that was not so clever. So now we are behind. But and in Denmark we also have we don't have the same problems about females not doing sport, because actually more females do sport than men in the adult population. But we have the problems in the sport organizations, or at least especially in DIF, where more men than female do sports in the clubs. And some of the issues we try now to do in some of the traditionally male-oriented sports is trying to reach the females. And a funny story about this thing is actually our concept Football Fitness, where we, together with our National Football Federation, developed this concept Football Fitness, which is football for fun, five-a-side and so on, in more flexible ways. And our target was actually we thought we would get 90% men doing football fitness. But by mistake, we came to call it Football Fitness. And when we called it Football Fitness, it just attracted all the females. So, and it's actually a story about that often we do things in the federation where men like me and others do the concepts, and we think in men way. In this instance, we by mistake called it Football Fitness, and then we hit the women. So we need actually, in order to be able to get more females to do work in our sports clubs and federations, we need more females on deciding posts or advising us on how do female things in these matters and so on. Yes, I would also say that one of the issues we will focus on, and which you were also talking about, is that we will in the coming time focusing even more on working with socially less fortunate people and integration in DIF and the federations. And our new economic structure will more easily be able to differentiate between our sports in order to make those sports which are especially good at doing these things, making contracts with them, with doing these kind of things. So we go from a economic system where one size fits all and where they were rewarded for activities to making long-term individually strategic contracts. And one issue we will also focus on in these strategic contracts is actually a matter of good governance, where we talk about the situation in the international federations, that we will focus on part of these contracts with federations, that they have to be able to influence the agenda internationally and fight for some of the values we find very valuable in Denmark. And I can, as a story about I'm not saying we are perfect in DIF and the federations, that everything is perfect what they do, but in the process about our economic structure, actually one of the biggest issues where the federation said, "Halt, stop," was that they were left to themselves, prioritizing their trips to the annual general assemblies in the federations. Early on, they got small money from us in order to attend to the general assemblies. But so they were they are very insecure about. They now have to decide for themselves, and we say it's good governance to attend to the general assembly, but it's your choice how you use your money on these ground matters, and they are very insecure about this because the democratic control is so strong in those federations that the other board members and the clubs will not have the trip abroad because it costs too much. So it's just a funny story about that. Good governance can also go to the extreme that's not allowing anything at all. But I think that's what I want to say about the situation in Denmark compared with some of the things. I think for your about this benchmarking with big cities, I think it would be worthwhile that perhaps we would talk to Copenhagen. It could be interesting for them, so we could talk about that. Okay.
Please have a seat. Still have some time for questions and comments. And actually, to pick up on that, David, I know it's difficult to compare London with 7 million and Vejen with 7,000 inhabitants. But still, because what always strikes me when we go to England is you are very, very good at making these videos with this nice music. We want to make 1 more billion people active, create better lives. And the music, I don't know which composer it is that's always used for these videos. But anyway, the strategies sound very nice. But then sometimes when we come over from Denmark where we don't have strategies, we just sort of do things. We think, yes, of course, we have always done that. We just didn't call it anything. So you said yesterday you hardly had a leisure center like this in London.
Yeah.
So what is your impression when you look? Could you pick up something from our model, except better funding?
Yeah, well, absolutely. If there were facilities like this across London, it would be a no-brainer that people would want to do things in this kind of environment. It's flabbergasting that 7,000 people, you said? And yeah, you would never get that. There's probably 5 facilities like this across the whole of London. Facilities is a big issue. The one thing you'll see in the video, the nicely edited video, parks and open spaces are probably going to be the biggest growth areas in terms of activity, and there are already private organisations that are looking to predominantly attract female, so things like British Military Fitness and our parks are organisations where they will take and offer to parks using social media, using technology, getting people active at a very low cost. But in terms of places like this, you just wouldn't find the space in London to build something like this, which is the biggest challenge.
For both of you, British, in Sport Scotland, Sport Wales, London Sport, one thing I noticed is you invest in whoever can deliver the targets you set up, and they are not member organizations; they are government agencies, you can say. In Denmark, we still have a system of investing through organized sport, you can say, but they have to then broaden the way they look at the world. What do you think? Is that going to work, or what is your impression?
And the funny thing is, the Welsh have been doing this for quite a while anyway, when they, give an example, when they launched a new strategy with this relationship with Public Health Wales, it wasn't launched in a sports club. It was launched in the back garden of a lady who used to weigh 110 kilos, got active, started getting people, women active. They started running in the evenings in the middle of a most deprived place in the UK. And now Sarah Draper has lost about 30 kilos. She now runs Ironman, triathlon, God knows what. And she now runs an enterprise where she gets women and men who are overweight, inactive, active in her back garden. And she's now franchising this across Wales. So that new strategy was launched from her, that shed, basically. It wasn't launched in a football club or rugby club, but they were saying, to emphasize, there are people out there who can do this, come and talk to us. And I think she may have met the people from Wales Athletics, I'm not sure.
So Morten, would you like in your system to have funding? The only way you can do a change of structure like you have done is to, in advance, tell the federations the money that is distributed to you will be the same. We do it in another way, but the total amount is the same. Would you like to have more free money that you could use to work with delivering sport to care homes or developing apps or whatever it takes to reach different target groups?
Yeah, but it's actually not quite true that it's the same amount of money, because our economic distribution will only in a transition phase secure 90%.
Yes, but the total amount for distribution among the 61 is the same, but maybe one federation will get less and another one will get more.
Yeah, but that's also important in how you will free money can. Some of the money can be used on projects, also DIF implementing them themselves, but also with corporations and organizations and corporations. So I don't think it's that simple, but I think the good thing about our process is that because the federations have a lot of ownership for this, instead of just pulling it down on them, they have been implementing and adopting this themselves. So I think from the start off, they will have a lot of ownership for this. And I think that's an important point in opposition to what was happening in Wales, actually.
And Arnout, one more question, and then there will be room for questions and comments from you. If these sports organizations has to live up to your recommendations, stakeholder representation is important. Is that only the stakeholders that are within the sport, or does that also mean municipalities, facilities, whoever could have a voice in these governing bodies and the way they run the sport?
That's a very good question. Yes, I talked about internal stakeholders. I think the first step is to listen. We did basic elements of good governance. We looked into basic elements of good governance, and I think a number of these federations first need to make sure that they involve their own internal stakeholders, clubs, athletes, as a first step, and then as a second step, of course, move on to building sustainable networks and be a reliable partner in these networks. But the basis, I really think the basis is first get your good governance in a strict sense in order, the relations between these groups I described, these entities of your organization, your internal stakeholders, and then in the next phase go into engaging with your community. And I do think that engaging with the larger, broader communities is very important, especially in this day and age where almost everything is run by networks, not by sole organizations.
Because if we look at governing bodies, also in Denmark, we have the issue with the big stadiums where the football association and the league, they just say if you want to play in this league, you have to have a stadium size like this, and then the municipalities has to pay the bill, or the team will be out of the league, to put it on a very, I don't know the English word, but you know what I mean. Or it could be that they change the rules of the sport, and suddenly that means that all the pitches or halls has to be repainted, and there is no formal representation, for example, for the municipalities in such a process. Would that be something that could be in your structure, in DIF? Could that be one day that other kind of actors would actually have a voting right or a formal seat, like in Scotland, where we see the homeless football being the chair of Sport Scotland? Could you imagine that a little longer, further out the road, that the representation of DIF would be broader than the 61 governing bodies?
I think I could perhaps imagine it. I'm not sure if all the federations can. But even though they are not formally represented, I'm sure that the next years we have to open up in networks and so on in order to get more close to a lot of other stakeholders, even though they are not formally represented. I also think it's important about good governance when I see all the not yet publicly known indicators and
transparency.
Yes.
Is the transparency.
I think it's important to. We have a lot of small federations. I think it's very important to make good governance. I think it's very important to prioritize your efforts. Not thinking that you have to be able to do all these things, but find the essential things you have to do and make that good, and then take it in phases.
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I think you're absolutely right. And what we try to do is, in a first phase, we want all the federations to adhere to certain standards, and we really made sure that it's feasible for all federations, not only large federations. So also small federations, we can expect them too to run their affairs in a decent manner, and it's not because you only have 3 or 4 people in your organization that you do not have to be transparent, democratic, and you not have to have internal controls installed. But in the second phase, of course, you can make higher standards for larger federations. But first, you need to make sure what the situation is. You need to implement our standards, our basic standards for good governance, and then see, okay, maybe these 10 federations, we can expect them to adhere to higher standards. But it's a very good comment, absolutely.
We have a question. Please remember to say who you are and who you represent, if you represent anybody listening.
My name is Birgit Bøhl Nielsen. I represent the Sport Association DGI. I have a question that's primarily around the UK sport market, so David and Svend. We have heard about the campaign, This Girl Can. That's not from your organization, but from Sport England. Could you give some perspectives on how this maybe drives synergies to your work, or where you see differences and where your way of doing things actually should inspire Sport England? So could you please give some perspectives on this?
Well, This Girl Can, for those that don't know, was a marketing campaign by Sport England to get girls and women more active. The target range was kind of 16 to 40. It's been very successful. Sport England don't run very many marketing campaigns, but what they realised was if they had real people, so for example with Svend's conversation, the whole marketing campaign was around real people who do their thing, they have their challenges, they have their busy lives, they have issues with their body appearance, using those people that then could relate to the target audience. So there was a campaign, kind of 3 phases, where in Victoria train station, on bus stops, they had pictures and they had quotes, things like, damn right, I'm hot, get over it, those kind of things. So taking away the issues that women have around sweating maybe, or it being tiring, or being seen to be kind of bright red and about to pass out, and just kind of tackling those everyday issues that people face and making them part of the norm. And it has been a very successful campaign by and large, and I think that they are looking to expand it maybe to other priority groups.
I think it's also interesting to see that, and I don't very often praise Sport England, not because I've got a policy against that, but I just don't, because what I do is often not very good. But that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I'm about to be involved in a project in Lambeth to get women who are 40 plus more active. In England, the online website for female shopping is busiest at what time? 9:30 in the evening. Husband is half asleep or watching the football, the kids are at bed, I'm going to buy and look at some stuff online. One thing we're doing there is we're going to have using Instagram accounts, etc., to say before we start doing some online shopping, do 10 minutes exercise. There's no point saying these women go for a run every morning at 7 o'clock because their lives isn't like that. So sometimes, if we listen to people's lives, I call it, 20% of people who live in London, say, are self-employed. So they do sport in different times of the day, etc. Up in Bradford, in North England, there are lots of Asian cab drivers. So local supermarket, every Saturday morning, opens up the car park, keep the floodlights on, and these Asian cab drivers play cricket in the car park between 3 and 7 in the morning, on the way back home, so they can get their weekly cricket fix. Because they can't play cricket Saturday afternoon, because they're working as cab drivers. It is stuff, that kind of innovation there, and again, it's happening from people out there, but I think to some extent, the more we now listen to people's different lifestyles, the more we do things differently. In England, 25% of people work on social hours. If you work in a supermarket, in a hotel, in a hospital, you can't play football every Saturday morning because every other Saturday morning you're working a shift in a hospital or whatever. That is an issue, and the more innovative we are, back to the world of online media and digital media, the more we can do with that. There are 800,000 members of golf clubs in England. There are 1.5 million people who play golf who are not members. So I'm not going to be working with England Golf, setting up a program to engage with those people using digital media. So that whole world is changing now. England Golf needs some members. They need some more people coming through the door because they need, and the golf clubs are dying because the clubhouse are dead because people can't drink and drive anymore. So those whole models are changing now. So if England Golf ran the way they did 10 years ago, they'd be dead. And golf is a big sport in the UK.
Okay.
That kind of innovation is important. So,
thank you. I think we we will have time in the coffee break for once we will leave time for a coffee break. So I would just, if you want to ask more into these things, and I also think there is some interesting perspectives in doing some comparative and some networking between cities and organizations, and of course we are also thinking about that in our organization. But I will leave you one last short comment, if you have any, to wrap it up, and we will start with you, Arnout.
Wow, start with me, okay.
You don't have to say anything.
I think the basic thing is, for me, the basic message I want to spread here from my presentation is that I think basic elements of good governance are the starting point for all of this. If sports federations do not have implemented basic elements of good governance, this will never work, what you heard here.
Yeah, I agree.
David?
Very simply for me, and it's not original, but if you do what you've always done, you get what you always got, and a little bit less. So don't be frightened to be innovative, don't be frightened to try new things, don't be frightened to get in touch if you think actually there's something that I've spoken about or something you've heard in the UK that works well, to take away some of that risk. But just try and be innovative and try and get these guys that run these organisations to think in different ways. Make sure you have people from ethnic minorities, make sure you have disabled people, make sure you have girls and women actually as part of decision-making processes, because then your offer will be right.
Yes, Svend?
9 years ago, British Gymnastics, which is Idrættens, had a gymnastics-only board, and they were full of people who were not very good. That was all changed. They brought in Jane Allen, who was Chief Exec Australia Gymnastics. If you ever meet Jane, don't say no to her, because she will thump you. And they changed all that. So over the last 8 years, they have gone from 150,000 members to 250,000. They have gone from being reliant 70% of Sport England funding to only have 35%, because with more members you have your own money. So British Gymnastics can now more or less do what they want to do, and thereby Britain has gone from being probably one of the best elite gymnastics nations in the world. They've only got one gymnastics person left on the board, the rest are independent directors. The performance director, fair enough, is a gymnastics person, that makes sense. But apart from that, it's all people with business skills, governance skills, legal skills, etc. The English FA got 92 people on their board. There's one woman. Obviously my case.
And they still qualify for the Euro. Morten?
Yeah, I hope and expect to see that we in the future, the next years, will take a lot of chances in the DIF and the federations, and I think some of them perhaps will flop, but some of them will also succeed. I hope that some of our federations will make some changes in these directions we're talking about here. We have the Danish Athletic Federations here, who is actually during the last 3 and 4 years have made a complete change in their focus on their own sports, and I think I hope to see more of our sports making some of these changes. So yeah, but we'll see.
And we actually thought that the session about the federations and how they run would be the most exciting this morning, so that's why we put it in here. But the facility session was totally overcrowded down there, so just a service information. The next session, when we start again at 11:15, the facility session will move in here, and the lifestyle session will be in Hall 5, which is down there. And the sports sector and funding, which continues a little bit, this discussions is in Hall 4. So enjoy the coffee break, we'll start again at 11:15, and thank you to the panel.